The stage was quiet enough to hear a breath. A single microphone waited beneath a hard white light, and a young woman with a shaved head stepped forward as if into a confessional. The world knew her voice before it knew her wounds. It had floated across borders and living rooms, a hymn of longing that seemed to stop time. But tonight, she carried something heavier than a song. She sang not to soothe but to summon. Then, with hands that did not tremble, she lifted a photograph and tore it once, twice. Again, sending fragments of a sacred face into the air like ash. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was judgment, outrage, fear, and something else the cameras could not name. In that instant, a career that had risen like a prayer met a wall of thunder. People would say she destroyed everything. The truth is harder. She tried to break a spell. She tore a picture, and the world tore her apart. Her name was Sinéad O'Connor, and this is the story of the voice that challenged power and paid for it. In the late 1980 seconds, the world was changing but slowly. Pop music worshipped glamour, excess, and carefully polished smiles. Then came a voice from Ireland that sounded like nothing else. Fragile yet defiant. Pure yet furious. Sinéad O'Connor didn't look like the women on MTV. She shaved her head not for shock, but for survival, rejecting the image the industry tried to sell her. "I will not be your doll," she once said. When she sang Nothing Compares to You in 1990, time seemed to stop. The camera caught her tears, real and unplanned, and the world felt every one of them. The song became a universal confession of loss and turned her into an international icon overnight. Critics called her the voice of pain itself, but fame never softened her edges. While others played safe, she spoke of child abuse, war, and hypocrisy in religion, truths that most stars avoided. She refused to stand when the U.S. national anthem played, challenged politicians, and questioned the institutions that defined morality. For Sinéad, the stage was not a platform for applause, it was a pulpit for truth. And when truth collided with faith, when her voice confronted the church itself, the applause would stop. Because behind the fame, something was already breaking. She was born in Dublin, 1966, a city wrapped in rain and rosaries, where the church watched over every home like an unseen warden. For little Sinéad, faith was not a source of comfort, but of silence. Her childhood was carved by fear and bruises. Her mother's cruelty left wounds deeper than any prayer could heal. But inside those walls of punishment, a voice began to form, one that refused to stay quiet. She found escape in music, first through street corners and smoky clubs, where her haunting voice made strangers weep. Producers saw in her something raw and untamed, not beauty, but truth. When her debut album, The Lion and the Cobra, was released in 1987, it sounded like defiance Irish folk turned into thunder. And then came Nothing Compares to You. Her face on the screen, tear-streaked, shaved head gleaming, became the most unforgettable image of the 1990 seconds. She was not the pop princess the world expected. She was a prophet in combat boots, singing pain into poetry. For a moment, the world adored her, not realizing that adoration would soon turn to exile. With fame came the storm. Interviews twisted her honesty into outrage. Tabloids called her unstable, ungrateful, angry. She was a woman who refused to play the game, and that was her sin. Behind her rebellion was conviction. She had seen too much silence in Ireland's churches, too many children hurt while the faithful looked away. Her anger wasn't performance. It was confession. When she refused to let the U.S. national anthem play before her concert, She wasn't protesting a country, she was defending a principle. No flag, no power, no institution deserved blind worship. The music industry, built on compliance and image, grew impatient. Executives called her difficult, radio stations boycotted her songs, and journalists mocked her for speaking about trauma. Yet she wouldn't stop. "If you see a fire," she said, "you scream." Every scream cost her another friend, another stage, another piece of peace. Fame, for Sinéad, was no longer applause. It was surveillance, 1,000 eyes waiting for her next mistake. October 3rd, 1992. Saturday Night Live. Millions watched as Sinéad stepped onto the stage under sterile studio lights. She sang Bob Marley's War, but this was not a cover. It was a confrontation. Her voice trembled with fury as she changed the lyrics, replacing racial injustice with child abuse. And then, she held up a photograph of Pope John Paul II. "Fight the real enemy," she whispered. She tore the picture in half. The audience fell into a silence colder than any sound. NBC's control room panicked. Producers froze. When the cameras cut away, her career did too. Within hours, newspapers branded her a heretic. Church leaders condemned her. Concerts were canceled. Her albums vanished from shelves. Even artists she admired mocked her on stage. But Sinéad's act was not rebellion for fame, it was grief made visible. Years later, when the world discovered the systemic abuse within the church, people would realize she wasn't insane. She was early, yet in 1992, she was alone. The years that followed were quieter but heavier. Depression shadowed her days, as did the loss of her mother, and later, of her son. Each wound pushed her further from the world that once celebrated her. The same media that once chased her now mocked her for changing, for aging, for surviving. She sought solace in spirituality, first returning to Christianity, then studying Islam. In 2018, she converted and took the name Shuhada Sadakat, meaning martyr of truth. Her shaved head became covered by a hijab, but the eyes were the same, piercing, unbroken. Even in seclusion, she kept singing. Her last performances were quieter, almost like prayers whispered to a forgotten God. On stage, she sometimes spoke of forgiveness not for the church, not for fame, but for herself. In interviews, she said, "I'm not angry anymore. I just miss kindness." The world she once defied had moved on, but her shadow still lingered, a reminder of what it costs to speak before the world is ready to listen. In July 2023, Sinéad O'Connor passed away suddenly in her London home. No cause confirmed, no closure offered, only headlines repeating her name, now softened with regret. The same voices that once condemned her now called her a pioneer. The same papers that mocked her tears now printed them in tribute. After her death, the Vatican itself acknowledged the crimes she once screamed about. Survivors of abuse called her their first ally. Musicians who had stayed silent called her brave. History began to shift. She had torn the photograph not out of hate, but out of love. Love for truth. Love for the children no one believed. Love for a God who deserved honesty, not silence. Her voice remains, trembling, defiant, sacred. When her song plays now, it carries the weight of prophecy fulfilled. Sinéad O'Connor was not destroyed by fame. She was devoured by the cost of seeing too clearly. And yet, even now, her truth sings louder than ever, unbowed, unbroken, eternal. Fame is supposed to protect the chosen ones, to shield them behind applause and fortune. But for Sinéad O'Connor, fame became a mirror that magnified her pain until the world mistook it for madness. She wasn't destroying faith when she tore that photograph. She was exposing what faith had refused to see. Every artist who dares to tell the truth pays a price. Hers was silence, the silence of radio bans, empty halls, and headlines that erased the human beneath the headline. Yet through it all, her voice remained uncorrupted, raw as the first prayer ever spoken. History is cruel in its timing. It waits until the brave are gone to call them brave. Now, when the church trembles under the weight of its own confessions, her act no longer looks like blasphemy. It looks like prophecy. Sinéad O'Connor once said, "I'm not sorry for anything. I just wanted them to listen." Perhaps that is the truest sound of faith, not obedience, but honesty. And now, in the silence she left behind, the world is finally listening. If truth has a sound, it was her voice, trembling, fearless, unfiltered. If courage had a face, it was hers, marked by tears, yet unashamed. Sinéad O'Connor didn't sing to please. She sang to awaken. And though the world once silenced her, her echo remains. In every artist who dares to question, in every soul who refuses to kneel before false gods. Let her story be heard again. Like, share, and keep her voice alive.